Hello, good evening. My name is Mio Debham, and I'm an author, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here talking to you today about myself, my author's journey, how a picture book is made, and also to be able to read a picture book for you at the end. So here we go. So this is a picture of me. Well, me and my friend Akiko. Would anyone like to guess which one of these girls is me? Anyone? Anyone? No one? Okay. Which one?
The one on the right.
The one on the right? Well, the girl with the hairpin? Bingo! Well done. Yes, I am the one with the hairpin. My mum always dressed me like a boy, but I was quite happy with that because I was quite tomboyish and I wanted to be out in nature and doing things. So I grew up in Japan. I'm Japanese. I grew up in Japan. So here is a picture of me in my kindergarten in Tokyo. See, that's me right at the very end in a little pink dress. And don't I look sweet and innocent? But this sweet, innocent little Mio was harboring a deep, dark secret. A terrible, terrible secret for an author to have. What do you think my secret was? Anyone? What do you think my secret could be? A terrible secret for an author. Yeah?
You didn't like reading?
I didn't like reading. That's right, I didn't like reading. Isn't that a terrible thing to admit? And the reason I didn't like to read was because in my school there were plenty of books, but all of them, and my teacher was kind of strict. The lady behind us, she was kind of strict, and she wanted children to be what children should do, you know. So all of the stories in the storybooks in our school were kind of scary. They were all about children who didn't do the right thing, did not do the things that their mum and dad told them to do, were bad, naughty children, and then bad things happened to them. And I was reading these stories, and I was so scared. I thought, ooh, I don't like stories. In stories, something bad always happens. So I decided I didn't really want to read any books anymore at all. And that's what may have happened if I'd stayed there. If I'd stayed there, I may never have become an author. Oops.
Okay.
But then something wonderful happened when I was 4. I moved to Hong Kong. So there's a picture of me and my mum behind me. And the lady next to us is Auntie May. She was a teacher in the kindergarten I went to in Hong Kong. And Auntie May was lovely. And she tried to make me enjoy books. But I still wasn't quite convinced. I wasn't quite sure if reading was the thing I wanted to do because I was still quite scared about reading storybooks. But then, I was crazy about animals, you see. I absolutely love dogs, I still do, and birds. And when I started going to school in Beacon Hill in Kowloon, I suddenly discovered non-fiction. And I bought and I read every non-fiction book I could possibly find about dogs and birds and things. And because I was reading about dogs, you know, German shepherds have pointy ears and fluffy tails, whilst Cocker spaniels are much smaller and they have curly hair and fluffy ears. That's the kind of thing I was reading, so that's the kind of thing I was writing. So when I was 6, this is the kind of writing I did. So I'll read it to you. It says, my teacher, a description. Our teacher is called Mrs. White. She has brown hair, very light orange face, brown eyebrows, blue eyes. Her dress often change and her shoes change very often. But she is beautiful, so I like her very much. So that's just like reading about a German shepherd, right? Curly hair, blue eyes, that kind of thing. So as you can see, my writing wasn't very good in those days. I was writing just like the books that I read. But you have to cut me a little bit of slack, because when I went to Hong Kong, age 4, I could not speak one word of English. So not too bad at age 6, 2 years later. But then, something else happened to me when I was 7 years old. I became sick. I got this thing called tonsillitis. Now, tonsillitis, as I'm sure most of you are completely aware of, is when the back of your throat swells up and becomes really sore. Well, my mum took me to the doctors, and the doctor said to me, "Yep, tonsillitis. You have to get your tonsils cut out." Now that sounded a bit horrid, but he assured me, the doctor said to me, "Don't worry, all of my children patients, they love having their tonsils getting cut out, because that means after you get your tonsils cut out, you're not allowed to talk for 2 weeks. So you can stay at home, you don't need to go to school, and you can eat as much jelly and ice cream as you can possibly eat because it goes down very easily." Unfortunately for me, I didn't like jelly and ice cream. And I kind of missed my friends as well. I wanted to go back to school. So I was following my mum around for the whole time, croaking at her, because I couldn't speak very loudly. "Mom, I'm bored! Mom, I'm bored!" And I drove my mum absolutely bonkers. So although she knew that I didn't really like reading stories, she was so desperate that she went to the bookstore and she came back with these 3 books. So The Magic Faraway Tree, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Now when she gave me these books, I looked at them and I was like, they look like stories to me. I'm not keen on stories, but luckily for me, I was so bored that I started reading them. And as soon as I started reading them, I realized how wonderful they were. And I fell in love with story. And I absolutely loved books. And I started reading all sorts of books. And because I started reading all these imaginative things, my writing got a bit better too. So this is what I wrote, age 7. "If I had a magic flute, I will make people happy and stop the ice cream melting." So as you can see, I changed my mind about ice cream as well. There's a picture of me pointing to a painting I did. I will never become an artist, clearly. And I was really happy as well because I realized that not only could I read about chocolate factories and things like that, I could also read about animals, fictional animals. So I started reading all sorts of books, animal books, fantasy, adventure, mystery, about people and places I'd never thought about before. And my stories did improve. As I read more, my stories got better and better. So this is me, my writing, age 10. These are all from my school magazine. My story is called Ghosts. Clatter! I jumped. "What's that?" I said sharply, looking around me scared, because I knew that there was no one in the house except me. There was no sound. So I continued to read my book, feeling scared. Bang! I nearly jumped out of my skin. By now, I was very, very frightened. My hair stood on end and my knees were knocking. But I ventured bravely to the kitchen where the noise came from. I tried to say, who's there? But no sound came out of my mouth. I sat down cautiously. Suddenly, I saw something coming my way. Oh no! I sat petrified. Then, a small black cat purred at my side. So as you can see, it's not a perfect story, but I have got better. I have become a better writer. I've figured out that stories need a beginning, a middle, and an end. So this is my home, and as you can see, we still love to read. My whole family loves to read. We've got bookshelves everywhere and piles of books where there aren't any bookshelves as well. So I talked about, how reading makes your writing improve, but I'm already a writer. I'm a published writer. Why do I bother still to read? Because even now, books help me to grow my imagination, and reading them still helps me to improve my writing. Because books take us to places that we have never been. We can meet people and learn about lives that we don't know of. Because books allow us to go forward in time to the future and back to the past as well. Because with books, we can learn about things that we don't see in everyday life. Stories are wonderful because they let us walk in each other's shoes, make us feel what other people are feeling. But if stories are great, why do I write and read non-fiction still? I mean, why would you bother reading boring facts about what dog's ears are pointy and floppy, when you can read stories about, say, a tiger that wants to take part in the Olympics, or maybe a story where the temperatures are rising and the boys start to disappear from Earth. Or how about if there's a story about an alien that comes to Earth to spread a virus that makes everyone sad and unhappy? Or a story about a time when human beings have to look in animal poo for things to eat and drink. I mean, that's much more interesting than reading boring facts, right? Well, actually, the tiger thing and the alien who brings an unhappy virus, those are stories. That's fiction. These are 2 books that I've written. But the rest, the other 2 things, they're completely true. So in the 2 books that I've written here, Climate Change, Heat Waves and Big Freezes, and Yuck, I talk about really interesting facts. So for example, the story about how boys disappear from Earth as the temperatures rise. Did you know that turtles lay their eggs in the sand? When they lay their eggs in the sand, the eggs are not male or female. They only turn into a boy or a girl turtle, depending on how hot the sand is. Now, if the sand is between 27.5 and 31 degrees, which it is around the world, then a mixture of boys and girls get born. But if it gets much hotter, all of the eggs turn into girl turtles. So after a few years, if there are only girl turtles, there will be no turtles anymore. And how about that story about human beings looking in poo for something to eat or drink? Ugh, can you imagine? But it's actually true, because there's a coffee called coffee luwak. Who in this room has tried coffee luwak? There you go. It's the most expensive coffee in the world. And to get it, you see this little animal here? It's called a civet cat. It's a wild creature. It likes to go walk around the forest, and it likes to eat the ripest, most delicious coffee berries that it can find. And people, I don't know how they discovered this, okay, but people have discovered that once the civet cat has eaten these coffee berries and has digested it and pooped the beans out, the beans make much nicer coffee than they did before. So what they do is they collect lumps of civet cat poo, they wash them, and then when the coffee beans are clean, they roast them and make them into coffee. Can you imagine finding something wonderful in poo? That's why I love non-fiction, because there are so many interesting facts. And I love writing it as well, because I love researching it. I find so many fascinating facts, and I love sharing what I've discovered. So these are some of the books I've written in the past. The 2 lots at the top are books that I've written in years gone by. These 5, 2 non-fiction, 3 fiction, I wrote last year, got published last year, and these 2 were published early this year. I've got some more coming out this year and next year as well. And I feel really lucky, because I get to read, I get to write, and I get to work with stories all day, every day, which is a dream come true. So, now that I've talked about how and why I'm a writer, let's talk about the how. Let's talk about exactly what I do. Let's talk details. How is a picture book made? Well, although it's hard to become a good writer, it's not hard to become a writer, because writers only need very few things. So, for example, most writers can make do with just a pad of paper and a pen. If you're very lucky, you can have a computer, or if you have terrible handwriting, that also helps. But there is one really important tool that all writers need. It is more important and even better than chocolate cake. We always have this important tool with us, every time, everywhere, all the time. Does anyone know what this important tool is? Can anyone guess what this important tool that we need is? Yes? Imagination. Bingo. You need your brain and your imagination. So how do we use our brain and our imagination to make a book? Well, the writer's work is to gather ideas and plan your story out. Easy, right? Well, how do you gather ideas? You can gather ideas from everywhere. You can look around your life, you can think about what your friends or your family say to you, and you can read something interesting in a newspaper. But you might not want to write it exactly as it is, because if you write it exactly as it is, it might not be so interesting. So you have to think, what if this happened? Would that make it more interesting? What if that happened? So for example, I might look at my own life and say, what can I write about? I know, I can write about an author who's going to go to the Hong Kong Book Fair and do a presentation in front of lots of wonderful people. And so I might sit down and start writing the story. Okay, this author, very excited, wakes up in the morning, goes to wash her teeth, get dressed, have breakfast, and then she does some cleaning of her house, and then she has some lunch, she does a bit of writing, and then she goes to the book fair, she stands on stage, la 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 la, and talks to wonderful people, and then she goes home and goes to bed. The end. Is that interesting? Not really. I think if I wrote that story, everyone would go, So, how can I make it more interesting? Well, what if something unusual happens? So, what if this writer is really excited? She's going to go to the Hong Kong Book Fair and talk to you wonderful people. So she gets up in the morning. Oh, good morning, life. Life is wonderful. La 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 la. Goes to the bathroom, gets her toothbrush, puts some toothpaste on it, and starts to brush her teeth. And as she brushes her teeth, she glances up at the mirror and, oh my gosh! What's happened? Surely not. Her ears have gone from being human ears into great big rabbit ears. Oh my gosh! She thinks, oh my gosh. Can't be true, must be dream. So then what if she rushes out to her bedroom and wakes up her husband and says, wake up! And what she's hoping is her husband would wake up, look at her and say, good morning, darling, isn't it a wonderful day? But instead he goes, and she knows, oh my God, it's true, my ears are bunny ears. So then, what does she do? So this whole story can grow from there. And you can think of all the things, all the problems she has that she has to solve. Because can she go and cut them off? She might go to the kitchen and she might get a knife and she goes, and a tiny drop of blood starts and she goes, ow, I can't cut them off. They're real, I can't cut them off. Can she wear a hat? She puts on a hat, but it looks really odd because there are great big bumps in the hat, she thinks. Well, it's the middle of summer. I can't go to the Hong Kong Book Fair wearing this great big furry hat with great big points in it. Everyone will think I've got horns. So as you can see, if you ask yourself, what if, you can build a story. And you should plan your story so that it's interesting. It's got a good beginning, a good middle, and a good ending. And then, once you've planned your story, you can sit down and start to write. I've written after many, many hours. Actually, it takes, normally, doesn't take many, many hours. It takes many, many days or weeks or months to write a good story. But after a while, you would have finished. You've finished your story. Now what do you do? Is it time to celebrate? Maybe just a little, and I like to celebrate with some cookies and milk. Before doing what? Before you get back to work. But doing what? Time to edit. Everyone knows what edit means, right? What does edit mean? Anyone? Does anyone know what editing means? Yes? Making what you've written better. Yes, making what you've written better. So you So if your friend's a writer as well, you can do peer editing. You can swap your work and tell each other what you think is wonderful about their work and what you think you didn't understand or can be improved. Or you can get your work professionally edited. But we'll come back to that. But what do we need to edit? When we say we need to edit, what do we do? You have to make sure that your story is going to be interesting from the very first line. You've got to make sure that your readers care what happens to your characters, because by the end of the story, you've got to be about the story of me with the bunny ears. You've got to be saying, I hope she manages to get rid of her ears. I hope she manages to get onto the stage and that it's all okay. You've got to make sure that you've written the story in an interesting way and that it makes sense, and that when you finish reading it, you think, that was a really great story. I'm glad it ended like that. And then you have to check it to make sure there's no mistakes. And when it's perfect, you might decide, this is great, this is really good. I think I'm going to be able to get this piece published. So then you might send it to a publisher. And if you're really, really lucky, you'll get a phone call or an email from the publisher saying, we really like this story, we think it should be a book. And then what happens is, first of all, you sign a contract. So they say, okay, we'll pay you this much if it sells how many copies or whatever. And then it goes into production. So what happens first is that the editor, the professional editor, looks at it. So what does a professional editor do? Basically, what you have done yourself, but because they are professionals, they've been doing it for a long time, they might be able to give you better tips than you knew yourself. So a professional editor reads and checks your stories, makes corrections and suggestions. So this is a manuscript of something I'm writing, I've just been writing, another non-fiction work. And you can see that there are lots of comments on the side from both my publisher and my two editors saying, how about we do this? How about we explore that? And then I'll read them and I'll try and make it better, the best that I can possibly make it. So when the editor and the author, and it goes back and forth several times, so it's not just once. Quite often, the editor gives you some notes, the author works on it, sends it back to the editor, and the editor might make some more comments for the author to work with. But when the work is absolutely great, the next thing the editor has to do is to look for the right illustrator if it's a picture book. So, everyone knows what an illustrator does, right? What does an illustrator do? Say again? Exactly, they draw all the pictures of the book. So I was very lucky because my editor had a look at all sorts of different illustrators in Hong Kong, and she picked this lady, Adeline Coe, and she said, we think Adeline is really great because your book is about an animal, it's about a tiger who goes to the Olympics. And look, she's drawn lots of animals in the past, and she can tell a story. She's done cartoons as well. She can tell a story in pictures. So what does the illustrator do? Well, the illustrator gets the perfect text that you have made perfect with your editor. And then she reads it, she or he reads it, and then uses their imagination to decide what the character looks like. Because mostly, when you've written a picture books don't have so many words. You can't have so many descriptions. So it's up to the illustrator to make the whole world come alive for the reader. So the illustrator starts to draw their story, and if you have a really good illustrator, they will also draw a story within a story. That is, they'll draw things that aren't in the words. And actually, Adeline has drawn a story within a story in my picture book. So when I start reading it, you have a look and see if you can see the story within the story. Like the writer, the illustrator has to go over it several times. So they'll do the first draft. So they'll just do a quick drawing with a pencil and paper, or pen and paper, and then they'll send it to their editor or their art director. And then their editor or art director will say, make comments. So for example, in this first spread, first 2 pages, you can see that's Jifu, the tiger, and that's his mum up here. She's roaring. But my editor said to the illustrator, we think Mamu is actually quite important. We think she has to be more visible so that the kids can see her at the very beginning. So that's why, for the final version, Mamu is at the front. Sometimes the illustrator has to do it several times. So she thought that she was finished here, and then I got to see it, and I said, you know, this is supposed to be 2 separate pictures, 1 and 2. But because the swimming pool sort of goes all the way across the bottom, I thought it looked like one big picture with 2 tigers, which isn't right. So I actually sent this note saying, how about we do that? And she used my notes, my ideas to change the picture like that. So together, we all work together to try and make it as good as possible. And when the pictures and the words are as good as we can possibly make it, then it goes to the designer. So this is, actually, she's my publisher, but she's also my designer for this book. The designer puts together the words and the pictures so that the words are easy to read and they're fun to look at. So for example, this isn't my book actually, but I used this picture because it was kind of fun. First of all, you know, the words are put in one big block at the top, but then she decided that it was harder to read. It was easier to read if they were in white. So she made it shorter so that make it easier to see, and then she put cute little zigzags with some of the words to make them more fun to look at. So now we've got perfect words, we've got perfect pictures, and we've got put them both together. So that the last stage is proofreading. Who can tell me what proofreading is? Come on, what's proofreading? That's right. So we look through for mistakes. Mistakes in the pictures, mistakes in the words, mistakes in where they are. So, can you see who's doing the proofreading for this book here? Who is it? Me. That's right. So if you see any mistakes in this book, I'm to blame, sadly. Hopefully you won't see any. So there's one last look before the book goes to the printers. And as you can see, the printers print books in huge machines. So they don't print 1 page at a time. They print 8, they print 16 pages at a time. And then a big machine cuts them all up and puts them together and then puts a cover on or binds them. And then, finally, this exciting moment arrives when the doorbell rings, ding dong, and you open it, and you find the postman there with a box, and you open the box, and it's your book! So exciting. Do any of you guys want to be writers? Yeah? I can see some people nodding. Well, I hope that you get to experience this exciting moment too. So that's basically it. That is how a picture book is made. Now, I hope you're okay for me to read you the story that I wrote. Are you? Is everyone okay? Okay, great. I have brought my tiger, Jifu, because this story is called Jifu's Twist of Luck, and it's about Jifu, my South China tiger. And because South China tigers are very, very rare in the wild, he gets a bit lonely. He only has my crazy dog, Alfie, for company. So I brought him here, so I hope you don't mind him participating in the storytelling as well. Okay, so Jifu's Twist of Luck. Jifu the tiger lived in a jungle on the mountains of southern China with his mother, Mamu. Each day, as the sun rose above the misty mountains, Mamu roared a joyous welcome. She liked to make the leaves tremble with her thunderous roars, but Jifu preferred to lie still and dream of about adventure. One morning, as the early spring sunshine danced on the ground, he spotted some animals he had only ever heard of before. They ran along the path on two legs, and their fur was shiny and brightly coloured. Jifu remembered what his mother had told him. "Beware of humans," she growled. But the smell of adventure was too strong, so he silently padded after them, melting into the shadows. The two-legged ones led Jifu up a hill to the edge of the trees. Jifu's heart pounded with excitement as he crept out of the jungle to see what lay beyond. The valley underneath was buzzing with hundreds of humans. Jifu shook his head and blinked in amazement, and then he lay down and watched until darkness fell. After that, Jifu went back every day to see what the humans were up to. Some ran around in circles, some threw things, and others leapt into sandy pits. And Jifu watched them and he thought to himself, "You know what? This doesn't look dangerous. In fact, it looks like fun. So much fun that one day Jifu decided that he would join them. He ran happily down the hill, bounding onto the field. Instantly, all the humans started going, "Ah!" shrieking and yelling. Jifu roared in fright, which made them scream even louder and run away. All except for one. She was small, but very brave. She walked up to Jifu and she held out her hand. "Hello, I'm May," she said. Jifu sniffed her cautiously. She smelled sweet, like spring flowers, with a raspy brrr. He held out a gigantic paw, which May held in her hand. Turning, she called out, "It's all right, everyone, it's all right. He's just interested." Little by little, the humans came back to the field. May guided Jifu around, chatting happily. "We're training for the Olympics," she said. "It's going to be held right here in China. And I want to win a medal for my country." That afternoon, Jifu learned about track events. So much people running. He learned about javelins. And he even went to see the pool. And an idea grew in his mind. "Hey," he thought, "I'm a fast runner and I'm a really good swimmer too. Maybe, just maybe, I could win a medal too and make my mum proud." The next day, he came back. This time, everyone smiled and waved at him. Jifu bounced eagerly onto the field and stood at the starting line. He waited, as May had told him, for the bark of the horn before he shot forward. He easily covered the distance in a few enormous bounds. Sometime later, the first human crossed the finish line and flopped to the ground. You can't run with us, my friend," he gasped. "You're far too fast to make this fair." Sadly, Jifu walked away. A little later, he came across some hurdles and he decided to have a go. He raced down the track and flew gracefully over the first hurdle, muscles rippling under his glossy coat. Unfortunately, though, the hurdles had been arranged for humans and they were far too close together for a tiger. Oh no! As Jifu landed, he crashed into the second hurdle, smashing it into splinters before bowling head over heels into all the rest, sending hurdles flying in all directions. Oh, his paw and his poor bruised side, Jifu limped to the pool. Inside, he watched the swimmers as they dived in and swam swiftly from one end to the other. And he got another idea. Hey, I could do that, he thought. I can show Coach that I'm good enough to join the team. Soon he got his chance. One of the swimmers went for a break as the other 5 put their hair in their caps and got onto their starting blocks. Jifu quickly scrambled onto the last one, teetering on the tiny, tiny, slippery platform. Beep! And they were off! The swimmers dived into the water, but Jifu hit the water with a thunderous splash! Waves rocked the swimmers to and fro, and a wall of water rose up and splashed down over the coach, making him wet from head to toe. Beep, beep, beep! The coach blew his whistle until he was red in the face. Get out of my pool and never come back, he bellowed, wringing the water from his shirt. Jifu clambered out, his whiskers drooping. You see how sad he is. Would he ever find anything that he could do? Outside, he met May, who flung her arms around him. You poor thing, she said. Come into the gym, you'll soon be dry. She led him aside and sat down. This is where I do rhythmic gymnastics, she said, showing him a long red ribbon. But one of my teammates twisted her ankle the other day, and Coach doesn't think she's going to be well enough for the Olympics. She sighed and her shoulders sagged. No, no, we might have to drop out. Jifu butted May gently with his huge head and rubbed his soft fur against her, but the tears still came down her cheeks. How could he cheer her up? Frustrated, he twitched his tail and a flash of red flicked past his eyes. Somehow, May's ribbon had become tangled with his tail. Standing up, Jifu whirled around, trying to catch the end of the ribbon, but it fluttered and flitted away from him. He twirled and twisted, rolled and leapt, trying to catch the end, until he was absolutely exhausted. But then, when he stopped to have a break, he heard the most wonderful sound. May was laughing. Jifu turned and saw May hug a man standing next to her. Coach says that you can be on our team if you like, she said, her eyes sparkling. He says that is one of the best ribbon routines he's ever seen. Jifu roared with joy until the walls shook, and then he joined May as she twirled and danced with her red ribbon. The end. Thank you very much. As you can see, he did have a visitor at the Olympics. Who's that? Mamu, exactly. And can you see who's sitting next to Mamu? Did anyone spot that there was a little rabbit who's on every single page of the story, keeping an eye on Jifu? And it was because the illustrator said to me, she said, you know, when I started going out on my own, I didn't like going out with my mum, and my mum worried about me all the time. But if I saw her looking at me or following me down the street, I would get really angry and I'd yell at her. So she would get lots of spies. She would ask all of her friends to spy on me and make sure that I was safe. So she put that story in the story, which I really love. Anyway, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mio, for this wonderful sharing session. I believe that every one of us has learned more about picture books and how different people worked hard together to make it happen. And now, it is time for our audience to take this center stage as we move on to the Q&A session. Please take this opportunity and ask me what's in your mind.
Don't be shy.
Thanks so much for your intriguing and engaging talk. I actually have a question. So have you written any stories that do not follow the traditional narrative structure? Like, what do you make of stories that do not have a beginning or an ending?
I also have a story, so looking into history, I know that you've published in both adults and children literature. I'd like to ask what's the most major difference in the two realms, and how do you return to that childhood innocence that resonates with children when you're an adult who has multiple experience? That's something I'm really curious about. And thank you for your amazing talk.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to start off with her question and then I'll come back to yours. I started off writing for adults, and I was writing a lot of. I like to explore how people's brains work, how people think when they're in times of stress. And actually, my adult stories were rather dark. They were rather scary. They featured things like people dying and things like this. And in fact, I got one story published once, which was actually quite a happy story. And when I got it published, one of my fellow writers came and talked to me, and he said, I loved your story. I didn't think it was you because no one died in it. I was quite surprised when I saw the thing. So I used to write all this very dark stuff. And then when I had children of my own, I started writing children's books. And I just fell in love because I remembered what it was like to feel innocent, to feel hopeful, and not know everything there was to know in the world. And I guess it helps that I'm a big kid at heart, although, as you can see from my white hairs, I'm not quite a kid in age anymore. In fact, when my daughter was in her early 20s, she made me do this quiz with her, some silly magazine quiz, which guesses your age depending on your answers. And she was 21 or 22, and when she did this quiz, the quiz came out and the answer was, you are 22. So she was like, perfect! What did you get, Mum? I was 16. So as you can see, I haven't really grown up, so that's why I find it quite easy to pull myself back to being a kid again. And also I work with kids, I go to schools and things like that. So I'm exposed to them a lot, and I like chatting with kids and finding out what they're interested in. Let's see, have I worked on stories which aren't traditional? Well, I guess when you say not traditional, do you mean not have a beginning, middle, and end? I guess the only stories that I have done that for really is flash fiction. I've done quite a lot of flash fiction where flash fiction is so short that you really have to hit the middle of the story where you have so many questions and no answers. So I guess that's the only non-traditional, if you like, kind of story I've written. Does that answer your question? Anyone else?
Hello, I would like to know what's your secrets or what's your key to writing good picture books?
Okay, what's my key? It's a good question. I guess the key to writing a good picture book is to not to talk down to your reader, because picture books are meant for young people, and I find that a lot of writers, and myself included, when they first start writing for children, you write from an adult point of view. You kind of want to tell the kids what they should and they shouldn't be doing and stuff like this. So the stories tend to be quite didactic. You are trying to teach them something, and the characters, the children in the stories, they're just there going, yes, mummy, no, mummy, you know, and they might do something wrong, but then something bad happens, and then, yes, mummy, you were right, mummy, I have learned my lesson now. But to make it a good story, you should let the character be more natural. You should let them be naughty, and they should find out by themselves what they should be doing or they shouldn't be doing. So they should be able to discover the world for themselves. I think that's the most important thing when you're writing a good picture book, not to talk down to your children, but to talk at the same level as the children. See the world as they would see it. Is that helpful? Anyone else?
Hi. Can you share how you develop your storyline? How you put the way of telling the story? Sometimes you rearrange the stages, the sequence, maybe sometimes upside down. So how you develop your storyline?
Sometimes it takes a long time to discover the best way to write a story. I'm working on a young adult novel, so almost an adult novel, but with younger characters, where it's told like a hairpin. So something has happened, and you don't know what has happened, and the story is told and the person it has happened to has lost their memory, and the story is told like this. So as he regains his memory, he's remembering the past, but he's also having to live through the present as well. And it's a very complicated thing that I've set for myself, but I think it makes the story more interesting than if you write it from, oh, this is what happened and I'm going that way, or this is the end and I'm going that way, kind of thing. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think that is one of the key things. Planning how you're going to tell the story is as important as the story itself.
How you develop your suspense or the high moment of the story?
How do I develop it? I develop it by throwing more problems. If I'm doing a more advanced story, like a novel or something, I develop it by throwing more problems at the character. So the character wants to do this, they have to go from A to B. Maybe I would put someone who, I don't know, I'm being facetious, but someone who wants to kill them in between. So then they have to fight the person, and then they think that they're going to manage to go, and then, bang, there's an earthquake, and there's a great chasm, so they cannot cross the chasm. You have to think of problems to develop the suspense, and it's also told, you also have to think about how the character is feeling, because the suspense can be both internal and external. So that would be how I would develop tension.
I'd just like to ask, where do you get all your imagination from? Like, where do you get all your inspirations from when you're writing your book? That's what I'm curious about.
I don't know. That is one of the hardest things you can ask a writer, because sometimes I go for ages and I can't think of anything interesting. I do try and write a little bit as often as I can, just to keep myself, my writing brain going, lubricated, if you like. But sometimes I can go for ages without thinking of a single particularly interesting idea. But then sometimes I can read something in a newspaper and it can just be one tiny thing. And it might not be the story it develops into, but it's some situation that triggers something in my mind and makes me think, what if this happened to me? How would that make me feel? And that's how I find most of my stories, basically.
Hello.
Some said that televisions and films nowadays are limitation to maybe for their imagination. What do you think about that? Because as a book writer, your words are creating a world for them, but film and television help them to maybe limit their imagination. What do you think about this point of view?
Books are very different from films and television because I think films and television are more complete. So I always talk about being a producer or a consumer. And when you read a book, I think that you're a little bit of both. You're a consumer of what the author has written, but you have to use your imagination to flesh out what the world is like, what the characters look like. So you are actively imagining as you read the book. Whereas if you watch a movie or a film, you are much more of a consumer than you are a producer as a reader. But I still think that it's worth watching films and television. I wouldn't poo-poo that because it's all about storytelling, you know? And in the same way that some people say, oh, graphic novels, that's not literature. I don't agree with that either because I think that however you consume it, you can learn how a story is built, how a good story is built, the layers of a story, whether it's told by film or by book. And I think each has its own, place in the world. There's one more question.
What tips do you have for writers who want to get started but don't really know where or how to start?
What tips do I have for writers? I think there's two things that I always say to writers. First of all, I think you should read. You should read and find what kind of things that you enjoy reading. So do you enjoy reading adventure or romance or suspense or mystery or whatever, and see if you can find the sort of things that engage your imagination. And then try from there. I'm not saying copy what you've read, but sort of see if you can start in that genre first, to see if you can write something that you, the reader, would like to read. But I think there's really no substitute for actually sitting down and trying. And my first drafts are normally absolute rubbish. So don't get discouraged if you write a story and you think, oh, that's really bad. That's really, really bad. In fact, I wrote a story, this is years ago, when I was kind of just dabbling at writing. And I thought, this story just doesn't work. I like the idea of it. It was about modern art and how modern art intersects with sort of, this was for adults, so it's all about death and doom and stuff like that. But anyway, and I just put it in a drawer. I didn't do anything with it. And then about 4 years later, I got a telephone call from one of my fellow writers, and he said, "Did you know that the SCMP short story competition, the closing date is tomorrow. Have you put a story in?" Because we had all said to each other, "Let's put a story in." And I was like, no, I hadn't put the story in. And he said, "Why not? We all promised that we were going to write the story together, join together." So I was quite desperate because I had to write the story before the next evening. So I started thinking about the stories, ideas that I'd had. And I pulled the story out, which I'd written 4 years ago, which was absolute rubbish. But somehow, within that 4 years, it must have been fermenting in my mind or something. And I suddenly saw a way that I could tell it, which would take the same ideas and make them more compelling. So I managed to do that. I did it. I wrote the story in about 10 hours with 4 years of thought in between. And I won a prize in the short story competition. So never get discouraged, never throw your old stories away if you think the idea behind them is good.
How to design the characters to make the characters interesting?
How do you make the characters
How to
interesting?
design the character? So that the characters are interesting.
I think that the characters, to make them interesting, you have to make them real. So the kind of characters I don't like are the characters which are very two-dimensional. So if you have the good girl, all she is a perfect angel. That's no fun. That's not interesting at all. But you have to give them a flaw. You have to give them a flaw. So maybe she's a good girl, but everything has to be absolutely perfect for her. Because if things aren't absolutely perfect for her, she gets really angry and she gets really antsy. Or if you have a bad guy, there's a lot of stories where there's a villain and the bad guy is so boring because he's just bad. Every time you look at him, he's like, I'm going to do bad things to you. That's really uninteresting. But what if he has a little dog that he loves? And what if he loves this dog so much that he would do anything to rescue it if it was in trouble? That makes it much more interesting. So I think you have to think about different facets. If you're going to have a bad guy, give him some good parts or some surprising things. That's how you make characters more interesting.
We have time for one last question.
Thanks for the chance for the last question. We're having this event in Hong Kong, and it's quite uniquely situated in between China and the rest of the world, English-speaking world. Now, as an English story writer, how do you integrate these two different kind of cultures that we can see from your story? There's a lot of Chinese element there, the girls in the black hair, the impact probably referring to Beijing, and Tiger, South China as well. How do you sort of fine-tune that offering such that it is quite authentic? It doesn't look like that you're going to the Chinatown in the States, and get sort of the global audience interest.
Yeah. Well, it's a tricky subject at the moment because there's a push for diversity in writing, all sorts of writing, but there's also a push for authenticity. If people don't want you to just say, okay, I need to have a diverse character in there. I'm just going to throw in some Chinese person, and they're going to be eating chow mein all the time, and I don't know, or some Japanese person, all they can do is they do lots of bowing and they eat sushi. That's just boring. But for me, I wouldn't presume to write about a culture that I know nothing about. But I have lived in Hong Kong since I was 4. So Hong Kong is my home. Although I'm ethnically Japanese, I feel that Hong Kong is my home. This is where I made my home. So I have a lot of Chinese friends. I've lived here for a long time. So I feel more comfortable writing, about elements of being Chinese because I can also fact check it with my friends. I can make sure that I haven't written something totally insensitive, for example, or culturally wrong. But it is a difficult path to tread because you have to be a bit careful that you don't write something which is stereotyped, stereotypical, and insulting to someone else's culture or your own, in fact. So, for example, I would never consider writing about growing up as a black person in the Bronx because I know nothing about that. And I think you either have to live that life or you have to live next to that life. So if I was married to a black person living in the Bronx for 40 years, I might feel comfortable enough to write about that culture. But it's something that writers have to be aware of, be careful about. Okay.
Thank you, Mio. Our Q&A session today comes to an end. A big thank you to our audience for leading this lively, interactive discussion, and to Mio for answering all of them so passionately. We've all enjoyed it very much. We now invite a TDC representative to come to the stage to present a souvenir to Mio Debham as a token of appreciation.
you.